Hello. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to our third and final presentation by Pastor David. I hope you're all ready to hear the emotional resilience conversation that's going to be happening. We've got a lot of wisdom that's going to be shared, but before we begin, I'd just like to invite our speaker up. And I will hand it over to you, and you may take it from there.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Use this one?
Go. You want to use that one?
Is it possible to use this one?
Yep. That one should be ready. There we go.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Right. Good afternoon, everyone. You all sit so far away. Well, it is my last session, and I think you're grateful for it, because I will try to make it not too long. This program is in actual fact 10 different sessions, well actually 11 different sessions of an hour and a half each, which I'm trying to squash into one presentation. So I'm going to fly through it, and I have cut most of my slides out of it that you won't be able to see. You'll have to come for 10 days so that we can talk through this whole session. The Emotional Resilience Program was initially set up in order to help humanitarian agencies in Australia that during the outbreak of COVID-19 to try and survive, their staff survive emotionally, having resilience, because they became essential workers, and while everyone else were unable to mingle, they were traveling around providing a service to the community, but facing the great potential of being infected and eventually die. Most humanitarian agency volunteers are in actual fact older people. In other words, in the at-risk group. So I developed this program in order to help their teams across Australia. That was then picked up by Asia, and 17 countries logged into those presentations, recorded it, translated it, and went further from there. But so I'm just going to try and share as much as possible with you in the time that is available. I'm afraid I walk around too much. If I've got this hands-free one, I face the temptation of moving too much. So friends, COVID-19 has changed the mental health landscape. During the start of COVID-19, I worked with a number of government agencies which reported a major decline in mental health, and therefore domestic violence in family homes, as well as the rise of abuse that took place in the home. So we started to see a new pandemic that started to rise, which very much is illustrated by these statistics that you'll see over there. You'll notice that pre-baby boomers, the first group there on the left, which you can see by generation how that it is impacting each generation. The generation that's been impacted the most was Generation Z. So the young people of today, which I presented on last night. Before we go there, let me give you 5 warning signs of emotional distress. The first one is a long-lasting sadness or irritability. Primarily, women will experience the sadness, males would experience the irritability. Second one is extreme high and low moods, that people will swing the one way and then the other. Thirdly, excessive fear, worry, or anxiety, social withdrawal, and fifthly, dramatic change in eating or sleeping habits. You'll notice that these are also very common, 5 of the 9 major categories that you see in depression. But these are specifically the warning signs of emotional distress. The definition of resilience, psychologists define resilience as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant source of stress. And what I shared with the group last night that attended the meeting is that if I would clamp down a ruler, plastic ruler, onto this podium, and I put stress on the other end, when I release my hand that I put the stress on it, it would have resilience by bouncing back. But if I would clamp it down on the one end, put a weight on the other end, and we leave the weight on there for a period of time, let's say a month or two, and the heat and the cold in this building, and eventually come back after a month or two and we take the weight off, you'll notice that that ruler has lost its resilience. It will bounce back to some degree, but will not fully come back to its original position. And that is no different psychologically with us. As we go through major stress, you can deal with major stress once off, twice off, as long as you've got chances of bouncing back. But with COVID or other major traumatic events like war and that kind of things, you'll see that people stay under that stress for a long period of time, and that is where then we diagnose them with post-traumatic stress disorder. So what resilience is not, friends, being resilient doesn't mean that you won't experience difficulty or distress. Part of the impact of the world in which we live in is that is part of the sinful world, that we will go through crisis. Suffering major adversity or trauma in life commonly leads to experiences of emotional pain and distress. The road to resilience is likely to involve considerable emotional distress. Resilience is not a personality trait that certain people have and others don't. It involves behavior, it involves thought and action that everyone can learn and can develop. So when I did 2 trial programs with Indigenous people with severe levels of anxiety, stress, and trauma, I actually developed a program alongside Dr. Neil Nedley's Depression Anxiety program that specifically deals with trauma and help people by mapping out their trauma and over a period of 10 days, slowly but surely working through their trauma and helping them to replace anchor points and meaning in their life. When I work with someone that has experienced major trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, or if I would give you an assignment to share your life story this afternoon, those of you that have never experienced trauma in your life will be able to share your life story in a linear form. Start from your earliest memory, working through the present day. Someone that has in actual fact gone through trauma will not be able to do the same. They will actually share a little pocket of information here, jump over there, and they'll be all over the place because they've got a shattered sense of self. Trauma shatters your sense of self, and therefore they have to rebuild their whole sense of self again with anchor points. What is resilience? Well, resilience empowers you to grow, even improve your life along the way. In 1983, just after completing my Bachelor of Theology degree, I was immediately conscripted into the military. My country was at war, and after 3 months of basic training, was immediately sent into the war zone, where South Africa was fighting the Russian and Cuban forces that were trying to invade, and with major conflict that had taken place. And I recall one Friday evening expecting the enemy. We were waiting for them. We could smell them That is how close they were. Often we would smell them long before we would see them because it was guerrilla warfare. And one of my friends was shot and killed there right in front of me. Friends, it is imagery that never leaves you. It stays with you for the rest of your life. But how you're going to deal with that and how you're going to move forward from there will determine whether you are able to work in terms of resilience. In 2003, I was running the program in Cabramatta, a drug intervention program where we were taking people off the streets, away, working with them to the point where they would give up their drugs. And that Thursday night, 5 minutes to 10, 5 minutes before we closed our doors, the Asian mafia, the triads, hit our center to kill a client in our center, to try and through their attack gain control over our center. Out of the 25 services that were operating in Cabramatta, they could not, up to that point, gain control over our center. The sad thing is, I stepped in. I just went over without thinking into military mode and protected the client, took his position, and ended up with a gun against my head and eventually bashed up. And my staff was so traumatized, the ones that just observed what was happening were so traumatized that we lost a whole stack of our staff that evening, just couldn't come back again. And I recall the emotional impact that it had on me. I debriefed my staff before we allowed them to go home, and I went into my office. I'm glad no one ever asked me, David, how are you? Because I don't know what I would have said. But I remember walking into my office, taking out the yellow pages because I needed to get a glazier to secure our building. We've lost all the glass in the front of our building. And I opened the yellow pages and suddenly I was blank. I couldn't remember why and for what reason I brought out that book. And I paged to the front and to the back trying to work out what was the motivation, why I knew that book was important. That's why I reached out for it. And going home that night, reaching my home in the early hours of the morning, sneaking into my house, sneaking into the bathroom, closing it, putting a towel down so the light wouldn't wake my wife up. I switched on the light, turned and looked at the mirror and couldn't recognize the face that was looking back in the mirror. I showered, got into bed, and although the two events in Sector 20 HQ in Namibia, fighting in the war versus what happened that night in Cabramatta, although there was 20 years apart, suddenly as I lay down on the bed, closed my eyes, two events rolled into one. And I wasn't sure. I could hear the helicopters. I could smell the dust. I could smell the blood and the brains of my friend. And the next thing I was in Cabramatta, but with my assault rifle, ready to fight. And it was a complete distorted picture that I started to relive. Many years later, when I did my specialization in trauma, I was writing about that experience. This was many, many years later, friends, and as I started to pen down my events, I could hear, I could smell, I could experience. My whole sensory in my body started to react to those events that happened so many years ago. That is how post-traumatic stress disorder works. But if you are resilient, you can, in actual fact, come out stronger than what you were before. Growing resilience takes time and intentionality. It, in actual fact, focuses on 4 core components: the connection with other people, wellness, in other words, the way that I eat and drink and make sure that I sleep well. Healthy thinking, in other words, intentional about looking for distortions So if I work with someone that has been through major trauma in their life, I specifically ask them to write about the events, write about their experience, and I specifically look not for their spelling or for whatever. I'm searching to discover whether there's distortion in the narrative that they give. A child that has been sexually abused from very early, now as a grown person, will often believe that if they had value, what had been happening to them would never have taken place. That's a distortion. Because, friends, abuse doesn't happen because someone doesn't have value. It happens because the perpetrator is in actual fact out of control. And what is very interesting, I can open up an empty chair and project their story onto that open chair, share that story right across, even their age, and they with clarity will be able to say, that innocent child is innocent. And when I project it back to the individual, suddenly they say, well, my case is different. That is how the brain distorts. And we call in psychology, this is how shame settles in. Shame means that I carry the feeling, the notion that I'm defective, that I'm deficient, that I'm flawed, I don't measure up and I'll never be good enough. The fourth one is to give meaning to life. And friends, the way that we actually process towards meaning is helping to reframe the events. And if we have time, I hope I can say a little bit more with the slide, where my past pain experience, my trauma experience, has a meaningful impact on other people's lives. So I use my past to actually benefit others. This is especially what is so important in terms of resilience, is to guide people towards becoming involved in an honorable cause. In other words, come to that point where I actually look away from myself and I become a blessing for other people. Research that came out 4 years ago, which is a confirmation of a much earlier research, shows that people that are involved in an honorable cause, helping other people with no benefit in it for themselves, actually has a far better mental health as well as physical outcome. Volunteering, making a difference in other people's lives. But the moment you do it in order to get benefit in it for yourself, you actually lose both the psychological, the emotional, as well as the physical benefit what you would have received. These four things empowers you to withstand and learn from difficult and traumatic experiences. And the last point there is increase your capacity to grow from difficult experiences. So the four keys to adaptive strategies are vital for your building of resilience. And I'll just very briefly, to build connections, I'm just going to rush through that. To foster wellness, in other words, I'm just repeating what I've just said, looking at self-care, making sure that you get sufficient nutrition, healthy life habits. What we find that people so often do is that they self-medicate when they go through major stressful moments. And the number one self-medication is what? Alcohol. Alcohol is the number one. And not only is it amongst men, but it's with females as well. But what it does is that it actually shuts down your frontal lobe, which is crucial for your reasoning through the events that have taken place in order to get clarity. So the other is healthy stress, how you deal with it. Number 3 is finding purpose, volunteer, tangibly help others, be proactive, ask yourself, what can I do about the problem in my life? How can I, in actual fact, use the issues, the experience that I've had to become a blessing for other people? A young mother, and I shared it with an individual, so forgive me that I'm repeating it. I'm working with a young mum who had just bursted out into our center. And as she came in, she said, I've just discovered this morning that my father was sexually abusing my 5-year-old little girl. once we had them in a safe place, we started to work with her, and once she felt safe, she started to open up. And at one point she declared that her father was the father of her 5-year-old little girl as well. We live in a sick world, friends. And there are times that I go home, and normally my wife and I hug each other after a day apart. And there are days that I go home and I say, don't touch me. I need a shower first. I feel dirty with the events and the stories that I dealt with. This young lady, I challenged her with reframing, which we'll talk about later, of her past. And I took her through a biblical process of how to reframe. And she eventually walks into my office. She doesn't have an appointment, but she walks into my office. And the moment she walks through the door, I can see the weight off her shoulders. I said to her, what's happened to you? She said, I've just signed up for a new course at university. I said, I thought you're already a registered nurse. So what are you, post-grad? She smiled. She said, no, social welfare. I said, to do what with? She points a finger at me. She says, David, when you work with us on trauma and abuse, you talk from personal experience. Is that right? I said, yes, that's true. She said, but you've never been sexually abused. I said, you're correct in that as well. So she said to me, I'm one ahead of you, with a big smile on her face. I said, what do you mean? She said, my greatest pain in God's hand, she's repeating what I taught her, my greatest pain in God's hand is going to become my greatest gain. I've just signed up for social welfare because I want to be Australia's first nurse/social worker to work with women who has been abused. I actually want my pain, my experience of my past that I've worked through to become a blessing for other people. The last contact that I had with her, she was working at Westmead Hospital in exactly that capacity, working with women that's been sexually abused. Is she still a victim? Not anymore. She has risen above that pain. She's in actual fact using her past to help others and become a blessing for others. Point number 4 is to embrace healthy thoughts. So keep things in perspective, adopt more realistic thinking. And friends, this is where journaling is so important. If you're not in a therapeutic relationship with someone that you trust, journal. Take 5 minutes at the end of each day and journal about your experience, your thoughts, and finish it off, a paragraph. Go on tomorrow. 2 weeks later, you turn back and you reread what you have written 2 weeks ago and you look for distortions. I'll give you an illustration of a distortion. I'm running a depression anxiety recovery program in a community, and a lady, it's been conducted by, or it's sponsored by one of our churches. And a lady whose family is in crisis, her son started to use drugs. She used to be a member of that congregation, left the church, but because of the crisis, responded to this invitation. So she came to the program and went through it. Halfway through, one evening, as you note how I speak, I look at you in your face. I noticed that she just wouldn't make any eye contact. And that is an indication for me that there's something wrong. So I scribbled a little note, and as I finished with my presentation, I walked down, there's going to be a group work now. I put the little note on her desk, which says, I can see there's something wrong, that something happened this past week. As the group work is finished, and I go up again to finish off the program, she pushes a note back into my hand as I walk past the desk. I glance at it, it says, my family was in crisis this past week. I sent a text message to your phone, but you didn't bother even to respond. I guess the fact that we are not members of this church anymore, we don't matter to you anymore. Wow. That is the furthest of any part of my heart to act in that way. To which I responded, and I scribbled a note back and I said, stay behind. So as my team were packing up, I said to her, tell me, which number did you send this message to? Because I had pulled out her file, I had her phone number, and I had scrolled through my phone that past week, and I could see nowhere that number sending a message to my phone. And with anger, she grabbed the phone and she said, I'll show you. And she opened the phone, and there was one digit wrong. I don't know who got the message, but it wasn't me. But the distorted thinking is that if the fact that David didn't respond meant that we didn't matter to him. We do it every day, friends. We see two people talk to each other, and they look at us, and what do we say? They must be gossiping about me. I walked in here this morning, and two of you were talking, looked up, saw me, looked at me in my face, and started to laugh. And I sort of, felt, is everything in order, in place? Don't worry, I'm just using it as an illustration. It didn't really happen. So this program is, in actual fact, it explores 10 behaviors of highly resilient people. What are the 10 characteristics of highly resilient people? Number one is to be optimistic. The question is, what is optimism? Optimism is exhibited by people who tend to expect that good things will happen in the future. The opposite of pessimism, the belief that bad things will happen. Is your glass half full or half empty? What is your perspective on life? Optimism, thinking that the future will hold good things for you. Now, friends, I believe that we are still going to face some difficult events in our life. But ultimately, as a Christian, I believe that ultimately there's a future for us. And that actually navigates my life, no matter what is happening around me. I just recently, 4 months ago, had experienced a third operation, cancer removal from my tongue. And 4 months later, there's already new growth. Do I focus on that? Can I change it? The fact that I can't change it, friends, causes that I actually make a decision not to focus the whole time on that. But I deliberately choose to focus on the positive. So what happens when we are optimistic, living with optimism? Optimism affects the body at a physical level by influencing the immune system. Optimism people that are optimistic catch fewer contagious diseases. Habitual pessimistic tends to have lower immune activity than people who are optimistic. This is true regardless of physical health or temporary emotional status. Think about that. Truly optimistic people quickly decide what they can change and what they can't change, and deliberately chooses to focus on the positive. So I'm going to jump over to number 2 because we are running out of time. Behavior number 2 is to face your fears. Now, Southwich and Cherney says that the best way to deal with this is, in actual fact, to face my fears. I am scared, but I can learn from this. Or this is a test that's going to make me stronger, they say. And they use this in the military, that instead of moving away from that which you fear, you actually move towards that which you fear. Friends, I do training with a group of ministers, people that regularly stand in front of other people. I give them an exercise which they have to now share with their colleagues in a room. And I say to them, right guys, who's going to start giving feedback first? No one wants to start. But here is a group of men that regularly speaks in front of hundreds of people. Suddenly they feel judged in amongst their own colleagues. The longer you wait to speak, the greater the stress builds up, to the point where those that came last, their voices, you could clearly hear their voices shivering out of nervous tension. So move towards that which you fear. Number 3, having a moral compass. Now, defining a moral compass is this. Webster Dictionary defines morals as relating to principle of right and wrong in behavior. During COVID, there was a major challenge, friends. Well, during COVID, we're still in COVID, where from many parts of the world, the medical world were challenged with immense moral challenges, where basically they had to decide in certain areas who will live and who will not live. France was one of those countries where, as the patients were brought in, the triage team had to decide who will live, who will not live. I gave reports from our own country, medical doctors that were working in emergency care that were unable to continue with their medical work because they knew that they had to make a decision between life and death. Lachman says that moral resilience is the ability and the willingness to speak and take right and good action in the face of adversity that is moral and ethical in nature. As I say, the American Nurses Association had this report: today's nurses face increasingly complex ethical dilemmas, and the ability to do the right thing is often made difficult by differing values and beliefs of other healthcare providers. So on a personal level, what I have discovered is that every disappointment that I face in life, I have a moral decision to make, how I'm going to respond to that. And what I have realized is that God never wastes my pain. Never wastes my pain. If I would trust Him, He can in actual fact use that pain to enhance a ministry to help other people. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to His purpose. If I can tell you how many times I wanted to tear this passage out of the Bible. Many a time, friends. My niece was on her way to come and live with us in Australia. My brother's oldest daughter, she same age as my daughter, and they were very close. And in her gap year, she was involved in a youth ministry group, and in between 2 appointments where they had just finished a program, was traveling to the next location, the group of young people that were part of that team were involved in a massive motor vehicle accident. I got the news when she was still lying in the paddock. Behind them was a emergency doctor specialist team that saw the accident happen. They immediately triaged the 10 young people, and they called the evacuation helicopter to pick up the kids whose lives they could save. And they stayed with my niece in the paddock until she passed away. I boarded the first plane even before she passed, to fly back to my country to support my family. And by the time I arrived there, she had already passed. And my brother turned to me and said, "Will you please bury my daughter?" Friends, it's like burying your own child. And I opened my Bible to try and get direction on what I should preach on. And the text that it opened up to was Romans 8:28, that I slammed closed and I said, "Lord, not this one. Give me another one." But friends, I've discovered that these words are true. It's interesting that Ephesians 2 verse 10 says that we have all been crafted in Christ Jesus. The translation, New King James, says created in Christ Jesus. The Greek says been crafted in Christ Jesus for good works. Crafting, when are we crafted the most? When things go well with us or when things go bad? We're more pliable when we go through difficult times. And therefore, it is never intended to harm us. It's in actual fact intended to make us more pliable. God is not the author of it. But God will use it in order to make us more usable. For those of us that are Christians, often share with each other the text in Jeremiah 29:11. The thoughts that I have for you are thoughts not to harm you, but to prosper you, to give you a future and hope. Right? When you and I look at future, which direction do we look at? Straight ahead, isn't it? Our future. The word aharith in the Hebrew text actually means look back to discover your future. Look back at seeing your crafting to discover the plan that God has for your life. And that's what that young mum has just done. She has taken that and allowed that crafting to prepare actually to look beyond her own pain to become a blessing for other people. And in so doing, she actually become more resilient. So characteristic number 4 for highly resilient people is resilience and spirituality. Dr. Ahmad found that the number 1 key to overcoming tragedy in our life is religious belief among survivors to be the single most powerful force in explaining the tragedy and explaining survival. It is time and again that it comes out in research that people, and I'm not talking about Christian research, I'm talking about psychological research that's done, that those that actually have a stable connectedness with God actually has a far better mental health outcome when they go through major traumatic events in their life. And therefore, friends, we hear a lot about post-traumatic stress disorder. I developed a program that focuses on post-traumatic growth. And what I shared with the group last night, which forgive me for just repeating this, I've done 2 trials with Indigenous people. The reason I chose Indigenous people is that as a community of people, they carry more depression, more anxiety, and more trauma in their lives. Historical trauma as well as major levels of abuse. And therefore, many of them talk about generational trauma. It's carried over from one generation to the next. Where's it going to stop? It starts with a choice. So I've taken 25 in each group, selected them with treatment resistancy. So they've been under treatment for many years with no change. The first group I took them through, and it was purely a trial because I had in my research, my study, I had this hunch that I could help them, but I didn't know to what level. And I was blown away when the success rate was a 90% success rate. At head office, my president came to me and said, "That was a fluke. You'll never be able to repeat that." So the general secretary said to me, "You've still got some money. Why don't you get another group and you do a second trial?" So a few months later, we ran a second trial with a different group with same extreme severe depression, extreme severe anxiety, with trauma and abuse and suicidality stuck in there, with some withdrawing from drugs while on the program with a 93% success rate. And I realized then that we had a winner. And we're running another one very shortly. My own congregation has a property which they are putting on the market, and we're going to sell that property in order to have a purpose-designed property that we're looking for. We've already got an eye on it, where we will run 10-day residential programs consistently with groups of 25, open it up to the community, and hope to help make a difference in people's lives. So, friends, when we look at trauma, why is it that stories with the same beginning had different endings? Two men going through exactly the same combat experience. One actually is held back with post-traumatic stress disorder while the other one thrives eventually. Not immediately, eventually. Two women are raped at the age of 16 by a family member. One continues to use antidepressants for the rest of her life, while the other one eventually thrives. Two women undergo miscarriage. One cannot work through it. She stays having to use, sometimes gets electrical shocks for treatment and heavy medication, while the other one is actually thriving as a person. What makes the difference? This is what resilience is all about. To eventually be able to bounce back and go through whatever the world is going to throw at them. So the protective factors in resilience. Look at this research, and I don't think you can read the small. I'm just trying to get all the research that was done in there to show you that it is not just one small little research group, but promoting protective factors have been shown to be more effective in increasing resilience than reducing risk factors. Can we remove all risk factors? We can't. So why not rather focus on the protective measures? What are they? People who are more open to change and who have a more positive outlook on life tend to display higher levels of resilience. So people that are more adaptable, a commitment to personal or collective goals. So people that actually have goals that they set for themselves, or work with a group that actually has set goals to work towards. Number two, an action-orientated approach. So I'm not just going to sit passively around. When COVID hit, many people just sat back and just daily sat and observed the reports that came in. It was, the TV was kept on, switched on, and they just kept on hearing the negative reports of so many people have died, so many people in ICU, so many people on ventilators. Friends, if that is where your focus is, guess what? You'll lose your resiliency. Others could not get out of their homes, but they actually switched off the TV. Switched off the radio, and they got on with their lives, actually took the phone and started to ring people around and see how they were, supporting them, encouraging them. Furthermore, a spiritual resource. It's interesting that if you go through the research study, you will actually find that people that are in a religious community regularly having not just a sense of faith, but an actual practical faith which they practice each day has the far better outcome and resilience in their life. And then the last one there is a sense of purpose. This is one of the challenges that we see today with our youth, that we see more and more young people that just do not have purpose in life. As they come into the counseling room, I would ask them, so what is your plans for the future? Don't know. Don't have any. Why do you get up in the morning? Because I have to. No purpose-driven life. And therefore, it creates within them the potential of not being able to have resilience. So, talking about the protective factor in terms of spirituality and reframing, finding new meaning and purpose in the midst of trauma, confusion, and pain. Friends, if you're an immigrant to Australia, you will in actual fact find that within 6 months after immigrating, you will go through a depressed state. Having grown up personally in a state of trauma. That's what I discovered while I was doing my trauma studies, that you were living constantly in a state of potential trauma. And that hypervigilance just doesn't leave you. I was 3 weeks in the country when 2 of my family members back home were brutally murdered. And not just killed, but they were brutally tortured before they were murdered. What do you do with that? Trained as a soldier? I need to confess, some thoughts come through your mind. This is where you actually need to find new meaning and new purpose. 5 years later, I took a group of 23 graduates with me back to South Africa, to the same community where my relatives were murdered, where no one has ever brought to justice. And we set up during the day community programs for them to uplift their standard of living. And we ran 2 missions during that time. What do I do with the greatest pain of my life? It's a choice that each one of us have. We can either allow it to define who we are, or we can choose that it actually will activate us to something better. So reframing, as I said last night, is the transformative power of suffering. Now, let's imagine that I did take this picture. I was in California or San Diego, when I was walking around in the harbor and saw the sun starting to go low on the horizon, and I snapped this photograph. If I blow this photograph up, it will determine what frame I'm going to put around it, which will determine whether people's eye would be drawn to it or be distracted from it. So you tell me which one works better. You like that one better? That frame? Not? Does that bring the picture out better? What about the white? Better? What about that one? What about that one? Can you see that the picture never changed? The picture never changed. But it is the frame that actually changes the impact that the picture have on you. So what if the meaning that I initially give to a certain painful event in my life, I actually choose to change the meaning that I attach to it? Post-traumatic stress disorder happens, friends, due to the meaning that I attach to a certain event in my life. I'm running a mental health program for a community many years ago. And in my audience is a 82-year-old lady that comes into the program battling with depression and anxiety. And I have a test that I normally put them through to determine what is the causes to their anxiety and depression. And when I marked the group's tests, I realized that she had not gone past question number 8. So I phoned her up and I said, look, next week, can you and I meet an hour before the time? I'd like to have a bit of a chat to you and see whether I could help you with the test. She agrees, and she's there. And I opened up her test papers. I said, well, maybe it's just my accent. Do I have an accent? I've never noticed it. I say to her, maybe it's my accent, maybe it's the youthful speed with which I ask the questions. So I thought I'll bring you in and we, at your pace, go through the questions, and if you want to, I can mark it, I can fill it out, or you can mark it. She said, no, I prefer you to to mark my responses. I said, right, you've done up to question number 8. Question number 9 is, have you ever been exposed to forced sexual abuse or forced object intercourse? Friends, a reaction was that of someone who is puncturing a blown-up balloon with a needle. She just exploded in a flurry of emotions, and she just wept and wept and wept. I allowed it to be for a while. Eventually, I just reached over and touched her arm with my hand gently. She opened her eyes. She looked at me. I said to her, I'm the first person that you've ever shared this with. Am I right? She nods her head. Has she said anything yet? She didn't need to say anything. Her whole action, her whole behavior told me. I said to her, tell me what happened. She was but 7 years of age. Here she is, an 82-year-old, still believing that if she had value as a 7-year-old, the person would have loved her and protected her, not abused her. She lives after two broken marriages, many multiple broken relationships, live in utter isolation because of a distortion that she carries for all these years. The frame that we put around, the meaning that we attach to an event, will either activate us towards service and blessing others, or it will hold us back, completely removing resilience in our life. Point number 5, characteristic number 5, is to get social support. Our brains need social support to function optimally. Connecting with others releases oxytocin, which calms your mind and reduces stress. Friends, this happens from very early in our life. When a mother takes a little baby and puts the baby to her breast to breastfeed a child, oxytocin is both released in the child as well as in the mother. It's called the bonding hormone. Now, it's not the breast that makes a difference. It is the way that the child is held and how the mum connects with that child. Because normally, before digital age, what did mums do? They would look down at the little baby and they would coo and ah and do all this funny language that only mums and babies can understand. But what has happened since the modernization of the phone is that mothers would even breastfeed the child or bottle feed the child, and they would sit there, not even look at the child, but constantly busy with the phone. The child is trying to connect in order to bond, which is crucial for the development of that child's own sense of worth and value. There was a major outcry in Britain because a major hospital, hospitals that where mums have babies? But thank you, maternity hospital. Thank you, friends. In a big maternity hospital, they had put notice boards up asking mums while breastfeeding their children not to look on their phone, but to put it down. And the community called it discrimination. What the hospital were trying to do was to protect the development of the child, allowing oxytocin to flow so that mum and child could bond. Gentlemen, do you remember the first time that you touched her hand? I should look in this direction to the younger lot. Can you remember that? Can you remember the electricity that just went through every fiber? Maybe I should ask the older lot here on this side if they can remember that. It is the release of oxytocin, the bonding hormone. Friends, that bonding hormone, oxytocin action in reducing the amygdala activation and arousal, which may help to explain why positive support from others can reduce stress. Research even showed that when there's a close relationship between husband and wife, and the wife goes in and is sitting with an anticipation of electrical shock in a medical procedure, that the impact of that shock is reduced. Research shows that when hospital staff actually touches, the nurse touches a patient, that even that touch has a direct impact up to 6 months after an operation on that patient. But you know what? The solution isn't just receiving help from others. It is in actual fact giving help to others that also helps to reduce stress and make you resilient. We live today in a society where people want to be served instead of a community where we look out to see where we can serve others. No wonder we have today a very unresilient community. Behavior number 6 of highly resilient people is having resilient role models. When you study kids who grow up in impoverished circumstances but go on to live productive, healthy lives, what do you find? Well, research shows that resilient children, the ones who grew up to be productive, emotional, healthy adults, had at least one person in their lives who truly supported them and served as an admired role model. What's very interesting as you further study this point is that even knowing what kind of role model you don't want to have is even sufficient for this characteristic for people to have resilience. In other words, growing up in a home where abuse takes place and knowing that I don't want to live that kind of life actually helps people as well. In Illinois, in America, there was a period of time in which they had major problems with young people that were dropping out of school and becoming involved in anti-delinquent behavior, antisocial behavior, and eventually developing into criminal behavior. And the police just didn't have any answers. They did everything possible and nothing worked. So a group of retirees came to the police commander and said to him, "Sir, give us a go. Allow us." And he looked at these older people and said, "Granny and Grandpa, you don't know what dangerous young people you want to become involved with. Look, go home, close your doors, lock your doors." The retiree said to the police commander, "Do you have any other way? You've tried your way. We've lived our lives. Give us an opportunity." "So what do you want?" the commander said. They said, "Give us 2 things. Tell us, show us the name and a photograph of each one. And secondly, tell us where they hang out during the day. Leave the rest over to us. We've lived our lives." The police commander eventually responded positively, gave them a photograph of each young person with a name, and also told them where these kids normally hang out. So the older people went to those areas. They ID'd their candidate. They made sure that they have the right name, right photograph, put the photograph in their pocket, and they walked up towards the young person. And just before bumping into them, they swerved to one side and greeted them by their name. "Hi, Joe." Joe looked up. "Who the heck is this that knows my name?" And the senior citizen just continued walking. A few days later, they came back again. By the 3rd encounter, standing with a beer in their hand, a cigarette in the other hand, the moment they saw the older person approaching, the beer bottle went behind the back and the cigarette was flung away. Now, they didn't just stay by saying, "Hi, Joe." They eventually stood still and asked Joe, "Joe, how's your life been? How are you going? What are you doing for yourself? Is there any way that I can support you?" Friends, my team in Cabramatta were all volunteers. The majority of them was older people who actually volunteered to work with me to make a difference in people's lives. Today, in my own church territory, one of our pastors there used to be one of my clients in Cabramatta. Life completely transformed and changed. At our head office in Wahroonga is working one of my clients that used to be in Cabramatta, a client. The difference were made by people that actually decided to live their lives intentionally. A young man that came from South Queensland Territory, grew up in South Queensland Territory, I will not tell you which town, but his father was a lay preacher. After his parents divorced, his whole life flung out of control, and he found him eventually down at Cabramatta. He had 2 brothels, license for 2 brothels, and he was using drugs to keep the ladies busy, and he himself was using drugs as well. I was running a program to train up volunteers. Berta was an elderly Eastern European immigrant to Australia. She came up to me after the training. She said to me, "David, you've been talking about giftedness from a scriptural perspective. I've never been able to know what's my gift." I said, "Berta, what do you love doing?" She said, "What I really live for is to feed my kids and my grandkids and my great-grandkids." I said, "Well, you know what? We actually need someone on Thursdays. We don't have someone to cook for us food on a Thursday so that we could feed the people on the street." She said, can I come in for a trial?" I said, "Sure." She said, "I'm just 4 train stops away from Cabramatta, so I'll pack my own stuff." I said, "Berta, we've got our own stuff. You can just tell me what you need to make the food." She said, "No, I'll bring my own stuff." Berta was a short, elderly lady. She would put her backpack on the bench top in her kitchen. She would pack it full. And it was so heavy that she couldn't lift it up just like this. She would go and put her arms around inside, and she would slowly bend over to make sure that the weight comes up, and she would walk like this down to the railway station, wait for the train, get onto the train. She refused for us to pick her up, and she would stand like this on the train. She couldn't sit down because she wouldn't be able to stand up again. And she would get off at Cabramatta station and then walk up that entire block to us. We've offered, said, "Berta, just give us a ring and we'll come and pick you up from the station. I'll carry the bag for you." No. The moment we open up, 10 o'clock in the morning, Berta standing outside the door. This young man from South Queensland area, as Berta started at Thursday cooking, started to eat it, months later he came into my office and said to me, "David, what do you put in that soup on Thursdays?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Ever since I started to eat that soup, my life started to change." This is what volunteering from someone who thought that she had nothing to offer can do in transforming people's lives. Think about that for a second. So friends, that was number 6. Behavior number 7 is the role that exercise play in resilience. Most resilient people had good exercise habit that kept their bodies as well as their minds strong. Many of the resilient individuals we interviewed have a regular habit of exercise and believe that staying fit has helped them both during their traumatic ordeal and during their recovery. In fact, some of them credit physical exercise with saving their lives. Friends, there is so much that I can say on each one of these points, because I actually run an entire presentation on each one. We don't have the time. If you can, spend a few dollars, buy yourself this book, Spark, The Revolutionary New Science of Exercise and the Brain. That's not the end of the Spark, the revolutionary new science of exercise and the brain. Supercharge your mental circuits to beat stress, sharpen your thinking, lift your mood, boost your memory, and much more. I've never seen such a long title for a book. Written by Associate Professor John J. Rutty. He's a professor of psychiatry that trains up psychiatrists, that says to the psychiatrists that he trains that long before they even consider writing a script for medication, the first script that they should write is exercise. So the question I asked last night, which is easier to treat, depression or anxiety? From a medical model, it is far more difficult to treat anxiety than depression. Under exercise, though, you will find that anxiety will dissipate first before depression will. The moment you go for your first exercise program, you will actually return with chemical changes already taking place in your brain in terms of anxiety. It will take you 10 days. With depression, you will still feel nothing. Go beyond that, and you'll start to see the change happening. So in our trials with our indigenous people, some came in their walkers, you know. Every morning, 5 o'clock, we would wake them up. We would make use of group pressure. We would not leave on our walk before everyone is there. My team would scatter themselves out between those that walk fast, those that slow walkers, and in between. And we will use that opportunity as we walk early morning to try and encourage them, support them. And within a few short days, those that are on their walkers eventually put their walkers aside. There was a lady, elderly lady, well, I thought she was an elderly lady. I called her auntie, and by day 6, when she jumped up and started to walk without her walkers, I shouted out, I said, "Auntie, you forgot your walker." I just had my 60th birthday then, and she looked back and she said, "Who do you call auntie? You're older than what I am." 4 ways in which exercise can increase resilience. Number 1, exercise boosts your immune system. Number 2, it burns the hormone stress responses, which in actual fact would be toxic to your system if it's not burnt away. It changes your gene expression. In other words, neurogenesis starts to take place. It's anti-inflammatory. And all of those has, in actual fact, research attached to that, which you're not seeing today. You'll have to get me back for another day. Well, not just one day. Maintaining physical fitness is good and will assist in times of crisis. But friends, is that enough? So let me take you to behavior number 8, lifelong learning. Kathy Hammond found, she's a researcher, she's found that participating in lifelong learning had effect upon a range of health outcomes. General well-being, which includes self-esteem, protection and recovery from mental health difficulties, and the capacity to cope with potentially stress-induced circumstances, including the ones and the onset and progression of chronic illness and disability. So friends, one of the challenges that we face is that as we get into a career and eventually retire from a career, we think that we don't need to study anymore.
Your brain is a dynamic organ. If you do not stimulate it, it will actually start to decrease in its ability to function. Why not study one subject in per term in a program that you just have an interest in? Not intended to go and do work if you of retirement, but you actually just do it because you've got an interest, and secondly, you know that it will, in actual fact, do you very well. I recall many years ago, as I was working in Cabramatta, there was a gentleman at Avondale University that intentionally were trying to collect money for our program, because our whole program, we never charged for any services, and we had to raise over $200,000 a year to keep our doors open. This gentleman, out of his own, in his 90s, were doing a major work to help collect money for us. But at the same time, he was engaged in studying at Avondale University. I met with him. I said to him, "What are you going to do with your studies?" He said, "I just enjoy the life of young people here around me. I just enjoy keeping my brain sharp." These effects, which we've just mentioned, were mediated by relatively immediate impact of the learning upon psychosocial qualities, self-esteem, self-efficacy, and resilience, a sense of purpose and hope, competences, and social integration. Learning developed these psychosocial qualities through extending boundaries that we have in our brain. So friends, all of us have one way we typically cope in difficult times. But what sets extremely resilient people apart is they use a number of ways to deal with stressful situations. One of the most stressful situations for me is going to the dentist. I will put off until I can't deal with the pain anymore. And then I will walk in and I will start to sweat. My first sign of stress is sweat. I will sit there in the doctor's surgery, dentist surgery, and I hear the zzz, and my nerves just want to climb out my skin. What I have noticed, friends, is that whenever I walk into the dentist office, I immediately search for the articles and books that they have on display. And the first book that I search for is the Reader's Digest. I never realized why I was doing it until I was doing the research for this program. The first page that I would open up is the index, because I'm looking for, can anyone guess? Laughter, best medicine. And I would open it up and I'd go through all the jokes. And then I would go back to the index, look for the other one. Can't remember the other one. And once I've done those two, I will go down at the bottom of each or some of the pages are more small little, short little jokes. And I'll go through it, and it basically just deafens that you hear as you sit in the waiting room. What I found in the research was that cognitive flexibility and resilience, number 9, what is a good coping style that definitely works? Be tough in adversity? Ignore the situation? No. Highly resilient people all mention humor. Interesting. So, this is what I love about South Africans. Am I right? In most difficult situations, they always get to a joke. Yeah, that's how they survive. Substantial evidence exists for the effectiveness of humor as a coping mechanism. Studies involve combat veterans, cancer patients, surgical patients have found that when humor is used to reduce the threatening nature of stressful situations, it is associated with resilience and the capacity to tolerate stress. I have a TV in my house which hardly ever is switched on until major stressful events takes place. And then my wife and I would normally, it's hooked onto the internet, we would open up and either want to look at little animals that makes you laugh, or I look for, what's the something about gags? And I would watch those kind of clips that just brings out the humor. So friends, try it. When last have you really had a good belly laugh? See what happens if you actually have a good belly laugh, how your emotions pick up and you actually feel better. We come to the last one in our, I'm not doing too bad. Our last one, behavior number 10, is to have purpose and a sense of calling. Highly resilient people don't have jobs. They actually have callings. They have a mission and purpose in life that gives meaning to the things that they do. When times are hard, they feel a greater purpose is behind them, pushing them forward. So, the ability to see one's work as a calling may enhance resilience. This is what the research says. This holds true even for people performing dirty work jobs in the hospital, for instance, cleaning, those that are carrying around the bedpans, and for people who have been prevented from pursuing their chosen careers. I want to tell you the story of a Christian young lady that is working. She is she works at Florida Hospital, which is on the campus of Hollywood. And it has been given to Adventist Health to manage. And the chaplain there in the hospital were called in by the senior manager of the hospital. And the manager said to the chaplain, I want you to check out some of these cards that we receive. As patients leave the hospital, they are invited to fill out a card. Either it becomes a card to complain about something, service that was not correct, or to say thank you, or to especially highlight what one of the staff specifically were doing. The senior manager said to the chaplain, I've got to go into a board meeting. What I want you to do while I'm out, pull out that left middle drawer of my desk. You'll find these cards, stacks and stacks of them. I want you to categorize them in terms of what it was, the purpose of writing it. And when I come back, I want to discuss with you. So the chaplain pulled out the drawer, and the whole drawer was full, and he started to categorize them. Here was a complaint. Here was a suggestion to be made. There was a staff member that was appreciation spoken about. And then there was some for Chicky. And he went through it, and as he kept on working, Chicky's one kept on growing. Chicky was a Spanish-speaking Mexican support worker, carrying the bedpans, cleaning the rooms. And eventually, by the time that the hospital manager came back, all the other categories combined was less of what Chicky's pile was. So before the manager could ask the chaplain said to her, who's this Chicky? Is she holding a gun against people's heads to fill out all these, cards of appreciation? The manager said to her, to the chaplain, that's the reason I called you in. I want you to go and meet Chicky. See what she's doing. Sit down, talk to her. So she said, level 4, Chicky is right now busy working there, cleaning some of the rooms. So I went up to level 4, went up to the nurse on duty and said, do you have someone by the name of Chicky here? Yeah, Chicky's over there in that room, busy cleaning. So the chaplain walked in to the room, knocked on the door. A Spanish-speaking voice said, come in. Opened the door. Chaplain went in and said, are you Chicky? Short little woman. Yes, Pastor, she said, I'm Chicky. He took out a big pile of those cards. It says, Chicky, do you know this? Not sure, Pastor. What is it? These are all cards, people that says, what a wonderful work you. One resident said, this hospital just wouldn't be the same without Chicky. The next one says, Chicky was such a blessing. My healing in the hospital was made so much a pleasurable, rapid healing process because of Chicky, and just went on and on and on. He eventually said, Chicky, do you hold a gun against people that have a knife here that you say to people you better write or else? No, Pastor, I would never do that. So he said to her, tell me, Chicky, how do you do your work? Show it to me. She said, Pastor, when I come to a room, I first stand outside before I open that door, and I quickly have a prayer. I said, Dear Jesus, if this room has still got a patient in, may I deal with this patient as if it is Jesus that is lying in that bed. May I serve this patient as if I'm serving you. But dear Jesus, if there's no one in that bed, may I clean this room in such a way as if Jesus is going to be the next patient that's going to lie in that bed. And with that, she says, I knock on the door, I open it, and I say, hello, it's Chicky here. And she said, I start with my work. And if there's a patient there, once I'm finished with my work, I go up, I take off my glove, I put a new glove on, and I put my hand on the patient's arm, and I say to the patient, can I pray for you? And the chaplain looked at her. In the medical field, this can be seen as abuse. And she says, the chaplain said to her, and have you ever had any rejection? How long have you been working in the hospital? She said, Pastor, no, I've never been, no one has ever said, no, thank you. How long have you been working in this hospital? 14 years, Pastor. So what do you pray? She said, I pray always in Spanish, then they don't know what I can pray. She says, all I say is, dear Jesus, may this person not only be healed physically, but may the work that I did here today be such a blessing for them that they will also be healed spiritually. Amen. And with that, she says, I'm out the door and I'm gone. Friends, is Chicky's cleaning work, is it just a job or not? She actually has a direct mission. And Chicky, research says, Chicky would be far more resilient than anyone else. So let me give you a summary of the 10 points. Number 1, foster optimism. Don't be in denial. See the world clearly, but believe in your ability. Number 2, face your fears. Hiding from fear makes it worse. Face it, and you will overcome it. Number 3, have a moral compass. A strong feeling of right and wrong tells us we must when we feel that we can't. The next one is practice spirituality. Be a part of a group that has strong beliefs. Practice reframing in your life. Give and receiving social support. Become involved in an honorable cause. Imitate resilient role models or have people you know you do not want to be. Physical fitness, exercise adapts your body to stress. Be a lifelong learner. Keep your brain sharp, and it will give you the solutions when you need them most. Before last, have a number of ways to cope. Be like the special forces operators and laugh much. And lastly, have meaning in your life. Don't just do a job. Have a calling and a purpose in life. Shall we ask if there's any questions? Or is the time gone? No, time is gone. One question. There's only one question, but you'll have to speak up because I'm half deaf. I was told I need to be finished by past. There's a question.
Thank you, David. Where is the retreat that you're building on? And of course, do you use many volunteers or people that will come in to help you in the future? And when?
At the moment, I'm preparing for another trial, most probably very early in the new year. So I'm more than happy to share those details with Pastor Daniel, the senior pastor here, to make that available to you people. But it will be in the northern New South Wales territory area. My team, over the years, I've been the national director and trainer for the Nedley Depression and Anxiety Recovery Program, and I have trained hundreds of people who, some of them have never received an opportunity to run their programs for the community. So I've got a team that stands ready to work with me, but once we have established our facility, the property that we are selling, we're just fixing it up now for the market. Once that is sold, we will actually make an offer on another location, which I can't tell you now, but it's beautiful. It's on a 1,700 acre property with an 18 bed, in other words, 2 people per, not 18 bed, 18 room facility. So double that with 2. That's the amount of people that we can accommodate at a time. And the ideal is to work with 25 people at a time. So my team primarily are working as volunteers. As I say to people, often when we talk about reimbursing people for service, not everyone wants monetary reimbursement. Many people just want an opportunity to be able to serve, or the experience of being part of a team like that. So that is the way that we operate for 10 days at a time. So for each group of 10 days, we have a different team that comes in and works with me. One more question, last question. Yes.
You talked about resources that were translated to other languages or something. Is anything available to be shared, like in general in English or in other languages, especially with people who are like in war zones and everything like that?
There is a fair amount available on the World Wide Web in terms of resilience, as well as in terms of trauma recovery. The program that I put together, because English is my 3rd language, is at the moment on PowerPoint, not in writing form other than my PowerPoint. It sits here in my brain, which is difficult. Maybe my tongue first has to be cut out so that I can be quiet in order to start writing, and which I would love to do. My life at the moment is so busy that I just don't have the time to do that. But many people have requested that, and I hope that in the future we can do it. Okay. Friends, I come from a Christian perspective, and the reason for that is that I studied on purpose. My clinical work, I studied at a non-Christian university, and the intention there was to try and gain access to the best in Australia in clinical work. But I've realized that when it comes to trauma and many other clinical work, that a Christian approach, I'm not talking about dogma, but a Christian approach where your therapeutic model is undergirded by the Word of God has a far more powerful impact on people's lives than a non-Christian focus. Using this as an illustration, when AA was established, Alcoholics Anonymous, it didn't have any component of spirituality in it. And it was an utter failure. Once they had placed a spiritual component and embedded that into their program, it became a world success. All of us are spiritual beings. all of us. And if we actually try to provide a healing modality and exclude spirituality, we actually do not give people the best outcome. So when we started up with the trials, many of my clients that came to our program said to me, David, can you give us this, what you're giving us, without any spiritual component? I said to them, you choose, you pick and choose out of what I present to you. I cannot honestly give you what I want to give you, which I know will bring healing for you if I remove the spiritual aspect. You choose what you're taking, what you can't take. Halfway through the program, they said to me, we're fully comfortable. We know that this program is specific about what you advertised it to be, and that the spiritual element has a direct linkage with us getting better. Having said that, Jake, would you mind if I have a prayer for the people? Would that be okay? Gracious Father, we have journeyed together over the last 2 days, 3 presentations, talking to parents and teachers about our children and the pandemic, mental health pandemic that our young people are caught up in. We have focused this morning on how that our own past is in actual fact impacting our own belief about our worth and our value. And we've discovered that we're on shaky ground as we look around to people to define who we are. This afternoon our focus has been on the resilience and how we can, in the midst of major crisis, still stay resilient. My prayers for each one that has attended whichever program over this weekend, that they would walk away from there with a blessing, would have received something to think about, and that their lives would be impacted for the positive because of us. Bless each one, bless their families. And Father, we are not yet through the woods with what is happening around us in the world. Help us to be able to navigate ourselves through it, staying resilient, staying focused, and able to make a difference in other people's lives. Bless each one is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen.
The Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine